We are not in a period in history where we are managing consensus. What we are managing is dissent. One of the things that made 2025 good year was that there was negotiations between the US and China. The world is crying for diplomacy, for active diplomacy. And I think that we have to be back at the table.
US President Donald Trump has announced fresh tariffs on his closest European allies over Greenland. And the European Union has actually readied its own set of countermeasures. Now, to talk about this trade spat, we are joined by the head of the UN trade body, the UN Trade and Development, Ms. Rebeca Grynspan. Many thanks for joining us today. I would like to know your first thoughts on what's happening. Are you a bit surprised at the US announcement?
Yes, I was surprised. And maybe the main point here is that one of the things that more affects trade most is the uncertainty, is not being able to predict what is going to happen. And this affects trade and investment. And maybe this uncertainty and this lack of predictability will have a downturn effect on the economy. We were in a good place when at the end of 2025, the economy behaved better than was expected at the beginning of 2025. But this start of 2026 can have consequences on the predictions and expectations for 2026. The second part maybe is that today, the value of the goods exported by Europe to the US is higher than the value of the exports of China to the US. So a 10% tariff on those goods will affect the US market.
Yeah. We are in Davos, actually, and that's where a lot of dialogues happen. And we expect the leaders from both sides are going to talk about this issue. What, according to you, would be a favorable outcome? What are your expectations?
Well, obviously, from our point of view, a trade war is the worst scenario. Yeah. Yes, we will prefer negotiation. We said the same with China. One of the things that made 2025 a good year was that there was negotiations between the US and China, not just an open trade war. So we avoided the trade war. It's true that we have higher tariffs and we have more obstacles to trade than we used to have, but negotiations were happening. So in this case, we say the same. Yeah. Obviously, for us, always a negotiated outcome is much better.
Yeah, let's hope we get to that. But I also wanted to touch upon Trump's action a few days back when the US administration decided to pull out of organizations, dozens of organizations, and one of them was the organization that you lead. How do you see that move? And what's the reason behind the move that you can think of?
Let's say that first, that the US has not participated in UNCTAD fully since 2018, where the board of UNCTAD at that time, I was not in UNCTAD then, took the decision of including Palestine as a full member of the organization. But still, it's a political sign. And I understand that the US has decided that they don't want the UN to be a very active participant in the economic affairs. They want probably the Washington-based organizations and the international financial institutions to be the ones where the economic issues are discussed. That's their prerogative. Yes, we will continue. The truth is that we just had the conference of UNCTAD, and we had 170 delegations coming to our conference last year in October. And I think that UNCTAD continues to be an important voice of the Global South and a very constructive voice in the dialogue between the North and the South. And we will try to continue to do that in a very professional and objective way.
You mentioned the Palestinian issue. Was any reason conveyed to your organization why why they pulled out of, say, UNCTAD. And also just on that, I wanted to also say that they have justified the move as saying that organizations such as yours do not serve American interests anymore. So was there a reason conveyed to you?
No, I know what I have read also in the press and what they have said. Look, I respect the decision of any country to decide where they want to participate more or less. The truth is that what I think is that the U.S. is a very important country for the multilateral system, and that their participation in the UN is important. And it's important for the rest of the world, and I think that it's important for the US too, because there are issues that we need to approach collectively. It was a very good sign that they went to the Security Council, for example, for the Haiti decision or for the plan on Gaza, and they went to the Security Council, and I think that that is a very good sign, and I hope that that will continue, and that trust will come back, that it will be rebuilt also with the U.S. We have to admit that the trust in the multilateral system has weakened through the years, and we need also to agree that we are not in a period in history where we are managing consensus. What we are managing is dissent, and is the diversity. There is right now no common understanding of what we have to do together, and we have to build that back. We have to build trust. We have to have leadership that will be able to manage the dissent for the international system to continue to thrive for the new world. And I think that that's possible to do. We have done it before. You know, history is not linear. We have gone through cycles. And if we reform, if we do what we have to do, if the UN can concentrate in the areas where we are unique, where we cannot be, what we do cannot be done by anybody else. Yeah. And we partner with the capacities, the regional organizations, the organizations on the private sector, on the civil society, on the international arena that is not only UN. If we partner better and we focus more, and we reform, I think that we can win this battle.
You mentioned how multilateralism is on the decline. So on this topic, let's talk about the UN. You are one of the top contenders to be the next Secretary General of the United Nations. How do you see United Nations reforming itself? Because that's been one of the biggest challenges facing the United Nations.
Well, look, nobody believed that the UN could cut 20% of its staff, and we did, yes? And nobody thought that there will be a real reform agenda. And I think that we all understand that the UN of 1945 cannot be the UN of 2025. I myself have said that we have to embrace reform, that this is an opportunity. And, all organizations, nobody can say we are doing everything right. So we need to embrace reform. If you are a multilateralist today, you have to be a reformist. And I think that there is enough agreement that the reform is necessary to push for the reform for the future too. The second thing is that we have to change also for the good reasons, and I was referring to this before. Look, in 1945, the UN was the organization that had everybody, all the capacities around it. Yeah. Today, countries have more capacities. Regional organizations have more capacities. The private sector has more capacities. The civil society is organized. And the UN continues to think that we have to do everything. that everything has to be done in the UN. I don't think so. I think that we have to take those capacities, that possibility, to partner better. We are the only ones with the universal legitimacy to convey, but we don't have to be the only ones to implement and to do. And my third point, and this is my last point, is that peace and security has to be a centerpiece of what we do. The world is crying for diplomacy, for active diplomacy. And I think that we have to be back at the table, and we have to really, think how we are going to do prevention and mediation in the UN in a way that will be effective for peace and to protect people's lives.
Okay. Let's talk about trade. You touched upon trade outlook earlier in this interview. How do you see trade develop in 2026? It's been pretty resilient in 2025. Despite all the trade wars and the tariffs, how do you see it evolve this year?
Well, the structural forces that we saw in 2025 will stay in 2026. What are those? First, services in trade is growing very fast. And services are not subject to tariffs. So in this moment, services are a very positive force in driving trade. The second is AI, artificial intelligence, because investment is growing so rapidly. It has an effect on trade, a positive effect on trade, and we project that artificial intelligence will continue to be a force in 2026. The third one is South-South trade.
Yeah. That you're a big fan of.
Yes. Well, the truth is that today, South-South is 30% of total trade, the same as North-North. Yeah. And so it's and has been growing at a pace of 8% per year. And this year, we expect South-South to continue to be a force for trade, and a very dynamic force. My last point is regionalism. Yeah. That has been part of the resilience of trade. There are multiple agreements, yes, that have come up. Well, we have the African Free Trade Zone that is being discussed. We have the new agreement between Europe and Mercosur, 20% of trade of the world on that agreement. We have the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We have ASEAN. So the regional grouping agreements give some predictability and some stability to trade. And it's part of the resilience that we saw last year, and it will continue this year. The negative forces. Well, the instability on tariffs, yeah, and the possibility that a trade war will be closer to the scenario than we really want to. And that will continue to be a negative element in the trade dynamics.
I'm glad you mentioned the EU-Mercosur trade deal, because that's one point I wanted to touch upon in this interview. This trade deal has finally been signed after a quarter of a century of negotiations. Then the EU is also in advanced stages of signing a trade deal with India, probably later this month. How do you see these trade deals impacting global trade?
Yes, I think that will be part of the new strategy. Yeah, we are seeing a restructuring of trade in geographical terms, and we are seeing already a reconfiguration of the value chains. If you want to maintain the stability and predictability of the system, because it's so difficult to get to universal agreements, then you will go to partial agreements. And the partial agreements are part of the rules of the game of the World Trade Organization. That's why 72% of trade still happens within the WTO, the World Trade Organization rules. if we continue with bilateral or regional agreements, grouping agreements, we will continue to work, they will continue to work within the rules of the game of the WTO. And that will give stability and resilience to the system.
How much of these trade deals is actually to do with the fact that we are witnessing so many trade wars around us, the fact that the US president has imposed so many tariffs, unilateral tariffs on so many countries? Is it giving sort of a sense of urgency for countries to react?
Well, obviously, everybody's trying to adapt to the new situation because, as the Americans say, when the toothpaste is out of the tube, you cannot put it back. So there is a change of the reality of trade. And also we have to say, geoeconomics and geopolitics are today much closer than they were before. Before, geoeconomics had some space of independence, and that space have shrunk. And so you have to go to other instruments to be able to give stability to that. And everybody, trade is like water. At the end, the countries need trade and investment to be able to grow, and they will find the way for that to happen. My problem is with the most vulnerable countries that are very affected by what is happening. Are countries that have more capacity and the size is bigger and they can adapt to a new reality. But for the vulnerable countries, for the small island developing states, it's much more difficult. And I think that we have to put our effort, our support, and our attention on those countries that there is no reason for them to suffer the impact of what is happening. And I think that we need to shield them, to protect them somehow. And what we have seen in the US, for example, trying to extend the unilateral access to the US market for the African sub-Saharan countries, I think that is a good sign. And I hope that that will happen to shield these countries from this instability that can come with a shock from trade and from the economic side.
Ms. Grynspan, many thanks for talking to us. Thank you.
Thank you.